Welcome, 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 welcome. Welcome to No Head Podcast, a place where we learn to live in the present moment and navigate life together. If you're tuning in for the first time, my name is Dorothy Oko, and when I'm not doing my full time job in communications, I facilitate a mindfulness course at Google called Search Inside Yourself. And if you haven't subscribed, please take a moment and hit the subscribe button just now. It really helps me push the podcast. And today's guest is Marinke van Riet. Marinke is the outgoing Voice Global Program Manager for Oxfam Novib. Marinke, welcome.
Thank you so much, Dorothy, for having me.
And before we start and I go into the full intro of who you are, let's take a few moments to just fully arrive. You are in The Hague, I'm here in Nairobi. We have had a crazy time setting up. And so I invite you to just be centered, feel your breath. Yes. And we will do 3 breaths together. We will breathe in to a count of 5, hold to a count of 2, and then let it out slowly to a count of 5. And we will do that 3 times. Will you join me?
Yes, would love
All
to.
right, let's start. Breathing in. Hold. Breathe out slowly. Breathing in. Hold. Breathe out slowly. Breathing in. Hold. Breathe out slowly. And now let your breathing return to its normal rhythm. Just breathing in and out. Letting your breath lead you. Letting your breath guide you. Not controlling anything, just letting your breath be. And now, just bringing your presence back to this moment. Thank you. And welcome.
Thank you, Dorothy.
I wanted to start with a quote that actually led us to talking and me inviting you to the podcast. The quote is from Eleanor Roosevelt, who says, "To be mature, you have to realize what you value most. It is extraordinary to discover that comparatively few people reach this level of maturity. They seem never to have paused to consider what has value for them. They spend great effort and sometimes great sacrifices for values that fundamentally meet no real needs of their own. Perhaps they have imbibed the values of their particular profession or job, of their community or their neighbors, of their parents or family. Not to arrive at a clear understanding of one's own values is a tragic waste. You have missed the whole point of what life is for." End of quote. And I see you smiling as we are reading this. But let's start by you introducing yourself. Tell us a little bit about yourself and then about what this quote means to you.
Thank you, Dorothy, and so lovely to be invited to your podcast. I've been following you for quite some time now, and I love the title already, No Head, because that's precisely what I've been trying to do with the recent decisions I took in my life, is to really look, function with my heart and less of my head. So my name is Marinke van Riet. I've just turned half a century. It's important because supposedly I've reached the level of maturity. And maybe supposedly I am an adult, although I don't always take myself and life too seriously, but I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about that. Currently the outgoing manager for Voice, and Voice has been the biggest privilege of my life, to lead a grant facility that works on diversity and inclusion, based on the principle of nothing about us without us, has led me to a profound reflection on who I am, what my added value is, what my purpose is, by meeting extraordinary people who have a very different lived reality. I've seen within Voice, within this grant facility, a culmination of various aspects of my life. I'm a Dutch citizen, an anthropologist by training, big passion for Africa. I think I'm one of the few non-Africans who can say that they visited all African countries, except for South Sudan. And currently based in Den Haag, haven't been able to travel for my work as much as I would like to. So yeah, that in a small nutshell is just one part of me.
Right.
I like to play with various parts of me, various identities that we all have, and depending on the space and time, there are different aspects of my life and my personality that come out. The quote is very meaningful of where I am right now in my life. I've reached an emotional maturity, still reaching to aim higher. That has led me to make decisions more based on my emotions, more based on my feelings, rather than just on my head.
Right. And I'm sure it wasn't just one good day and you decided, this is the end. I'm going to leave Voices and hand over to the next generation. There must have been a process. Can you talk us through the process, the journey that led you to the day you looked at yourself in the mirror and said, I need to pass the baton to someone else?
Again, the other conversations you've had in your podcast talked a lot about COVID being, obviously a horrible pandemic, but it's also been an opportunity to reflect on yourself, on where you are, on your values. And I've had quite a difficult year. I've had my dad and his brother, a close uncle of mine, both passed away. Nothing COVID related. They had a long, rich life. But luckily, especially with my dad in the last phase of his life, I've had many conversations on my dreams as a little girl he shared with me, and my aspirations. And quite a few of them have been fortunate enough to come out. But also he was sharing with me that at 50, it's sort of a turning point in your life. And that you may want to look at yourself and your added value a little bit differently from before. I'm an extrovert. I like being out there. I like doing activism and advocacy. But I'm also playing with a different mantra. The hashtag Sisterhood for Sistergood I really like. I came up with to sort of create space for others to shine, and that it's no longer about Marinke, but that's the other, creating platforms where others can take space and where others can shine. And that, I feel, is where I am at this point in my life. I say combined with COVID-19, there's also Black Lives Matter, the whole conversation around white privilege and decolonizing aid. And those have all taken a flight in 2020. They were all brewing, and creating a groundswell. But I feel that this period of introspection is really, has created that momentum where I could feel quite comfortable. I'm going to leave and create space for others. And then explore what still my repurpose would be.
Right. Talking about creating space for others, it takes a certain level of self awareness and almost letting go of the ego, because the ego wants to feel that it is needed and it needs to be there. Um, how has this played out, even as you're making the decision? This idea of I need to create space for others, and how have you done it? At Voices, even before your resignation.
That's a really tough question because I
Mm.
still feel I haven't found the right balance. A lot in this world is also around promoting oneself, making
Right.
sure that you are out there, and to then take a step back and say, actually, sister, take that space is not an easy process. No,
Right.
it's a constant juggle. I'm
Mm-hmm.
not there yet. But within Voice, we not only provide financial support to organizations, but we
Mm.
also have a linking and learning component. And
Mm.
this linking and learning component is where the rights holders, we no longer call them beneficiaries or program participants, but these are rights holders that have the innate right to
Mm.
claim a better life on their
Mm.
terms. And that
Right.
linking and learning space has provided people, and it wasn't about voice either. It was
Mm.
really about the rights holders that we serve.
Right.
And they took that space. And so it wasn't about me doing an opening, or it wasn't about my colleague doing a closing. This was their space.
Right.
And so we often had an agenda, and that was for someone who likes control was tricky. We had a white spaced agenda.
Mm-hmm.
We had
Right.
nothing on the agenda but just time slots,
Wow.
because it was up to the rights holders to create an energy
Mm-hmm.
where they could pick what topic they wanted to go with or wanted to discuss.
Mm.
And yeah, it's been a learning and a big reflection.
Right.
But and I think 50 is in general a really big moment of reflection
Right.
for for people.
I like when you talk. Actually, I had never heard of it except when I was reading your website and your resignation letter, talking about the rights holder. Poverty is really at the base of everything to do with international development, nonprofit aid. Um, and Wangari Maathai, I just finished reading her book where she says poverty is as a result of bad governance, environmental mismanagement, and an outcome of the global economic system. And I wonder, when you talk about diverse, you actually talk about inclusive governance and accountability. And you say poverty is really not the thing. But I feel like poverty, inclusive governance, and accountability somehow all play a part in this, the AIDS issue we have had, donor aid, in terms of just making the rights holder completely dependent for years on the donor aid and never getting out of that cycle of poverty. What do you feel, and having been even now as you're leaving, what can be done better to remove this cycle of poverty that keeps us, in this almost global economic system that wants the poor to stay poor?
Yeah, it's a big one, and I don't think I have the $1 million solution for this, but it starts a lot with dignity and self-worth. I feel there's quite a bit of um, even in the language that we use, and people self-censoring themselves by downplaying who they are, downplaying their worth. And really referring to the master, whether that master is in the form of patriarchy or whether that master is in the form of a white savior. It's all like playing into that dynamics. And dignity for me is also related a lot to education. And I think what we see, the level of poverty and the rising inequality, is also a result of years of underinvestments in good, solid education. Not telling people what to think, but showing people how to think. And yeah, even if I look at the rising populism everywhere and the rising authoritarianism, is really a result again of underinvestments in solid independent education. I was participating in a discussion on decolonizing age yesterday, and there were two fantastic women there who are both from the global south and who are sort of often on the receiving end in that donor aid agenda. And they said it all begins where the agenda is being created and where the decisions are being made. And oftentimes that is still at either in Den Haag or either in London or in New York or these big international spaces, or I would even say in the capitals of the African countries, in Nairobi and in Bamako and in Niamey, rather than in people's households themselves. And that to me is where I would say inclusive governance and accountability is also related to where those decisions are being taken and where the power to influence those decisions lie. And, so a lot of my girlfriends in Africa would say, I feel I may have access to spaces, but I don't have control, even at their own household level. Wow. So that to me is where a lot of it begins. And within Voice, we try to sort of topsy-turvy to reverse some of that discourse. But it's hard because it's also a program with funding from the Netherlands Ministry of Foreign Affairs, executed by Oxfam and HIVOS. So there are already certain parameters that you have to work within. But we try as much as possible to honor the slogan, nothing about us without us, and that we have abbreviated into now us to give it some agency and urgency. And a lot of, if you stay, and maybe that also has played into my own decision to resign from Voice, is because if you look at what's happening in 2020, the importance of authenticity, authentic leadership is so critical. If you look at a Stacey Abrams in Georgia, what she's been able to do as a woman of color. If you look at a Wangari Maathai, if you look at if you look at a Stella Nyanzi,
right, in Uganda,
their lived reality,
right,
allows them a lot of space, which I don't have. I have affinity, I have empathy, I'm trying to do my best, but I can never be their voice.
Right.
And that has also led me to the realization authentic leadership is so critical in this day and age.
Right.
Am I still the best to lead a ground facility that honors the principle of nothing about us without us?
Mm-hmm.
Then you have to be honest with yourself.
Right. But I see the challenge, even as you're leaving. I wonder, and it's not only Voices or Novi, but I think it's other organizations as a whole. So when you leave and you want to leave to a rights holder or someone who's Indigenous to the community to be the one to take over, what tools do we give them to enable them to succeed as well? Because sometimes my fear is, then something goes wrong and goes, we knew this wasn't going to work because of A, B, C, and D. How do we empower these rights holders to be able to actually succeed and almost put them up for success? How do we do that? And what do you think, even as you're leaving, what structures are you putting in place that will enable the person you pass the baton to be able to do as much as you can?
Yeah, it's a very valid point, Dorothy, because it's also the tension between having someone who has a global helicopter view of the world and someone who's deeply embedded at that community level, and that you may not necessarily want to take out of that community context either, because that's where she or he or they draw their legitimacy and credibility from. So that's a constant tension that or puzzle that you need to be considerate of.
And how do they talk to Oxfam and someone in the Netherlands like you? You are Dutch. You can speak to them and have access, which they may not be able to have. Um, how does that play out as well? So it's almost a tripartite sort of way, being in the community, talking to the headquarters, talking to the people who determine how much money they should get.
Yeah, luckily we, like, in a way, the global manager role doesn't decide directly on alone on big monetary decisions. And this is where the inclusive governance obviously plays a crucial role. There's a whole team behind it. There's a whole process behind it. And what you see in general in the development sector is this shift of power. There's a great hashtag about it, which is part of decolonizing aid. And the ministry, the Netherlands Ministry of Foreign Affairs, has been somewhat of a front runner by funding organizations directly in the global south rather than through intermediaries such as Oxfam Novib or AIVOS. So there is already that trend that is going on, and that voice in a way is also taking more of a leadership role in. So the structure, as long as you have good structures in place, you can offer a coaching environment. You can offer the sisterhood for sister good. I have no doubts that we can find an even more fantastic, no, that sounds very pretentious, a fantastic leader. Yeah.
So how's the process going on? Has the recruitment process started? And when is your
It's in
last
its
day at work?
final stages.
It's in its final
Some
stages.
hiccups on the way, but yeah, it's in its final stages.
You talked about the importance of dignity, and I really like the idea of dignity and poverty. And you talked about language. Talk to us how you look at this language and dignity, because at No Head Podcast, we really believe that the language we use almost gives you that value and that dignity. And how do we have the right language, and how do we maintain that dignity and give others dignity?
Yeah, it's been, yeah, and this is again a constant journey. Yeah, it's
Right.
to work on inclusive language. I've
Mm,
just written an article about it, the language of power and the power of language, because I really wanted to explore
right.
more of the terms that we use.
Mm,
For example, I'll give you a couple of examples that may trigger a further reflection. Capacity building is something we use a lot in the development sector. That means it's much better to talk about capacity strengthening already, because that already shows that you have capacities. Everyone has innate
right.
capacities. By strengthening them, you respect and you dignify those innate capacities that everyone has. Capacity building would assume that you have none. So that's already a simple way. I also feel there's always a lot of gratitude to donors. Thanks to Voice. And I always say, no, thanks to yourself. You did it. We may have been an attribution or a contribution, but you are the transformer of your own life. And so that's also, then I say thanks to myself and support of Voice, which is already a different power dynamic that you play into.
Right.
There's a lot of patriarchy in pronouns as well, especially in the French language. So I would say the teacher. I would never assume that's just a him. So I would always say the teacher. And if I don't know the identity, I would say she or he. So that's also, like, I learned, for example, that in French, all the female genitalia are actually masculine words, which I refuse to adopt.
Right. That's how language, that's how powerful language is. Yes.
Yeah. So like the headquarters, I don't use. I use global office. I don't use the term in the field. I also, like, Africa is one big field. Yeah, I'm going to the field, or I'm going on a mission. We're not militaries. We're not missionaries. We're going on a work trip. And I wouldn't necessarily equate Nairobi to a field. It's in a ways a much modern city than Hague is. So, yeah, I'm trying to be very conscientious and intentional about the words I use and the language I use.
Right.
And so I would always say the voice groups or the voice rights holders that we serve to show that we are a facilitative leader. It's not about us, but it's about those rights holders that we need to serve.
Right.
So when I do speaking engagement, I would consult, or I would first ask the question, should it be me speaking? Or should I actually say, no, this time, let's give that space to someone else?
Right. In your 5 years as the global program manager, what has surprised you most? As you've worked with rights holders in various countries, Vietnam, Africa, Kenya, Uganda, Mali. What has surprised you most?
Yeah, there's a couple. Let me think a little bit. It has to do a lot with working on that dignity and the way that people self-censor and the way that how people feel about themselves says a lot. And we've been so even in our grant making, we have various grants, and we have a very small grant called the Empowerment Grant, and that is really where people first start working together. And it's tiny amounts of money, but this is where people are come together and decide, hey, I actually want to work on my self-esteem. I want to work on being someone in my community. And those grants have been most transformative in bringing about more dignity within people. And that has been a huge surprise, that level of self-hate, self-loathing is so big within the rights holders group that we stand for. And that you do need to work on that quite consciously and intentionally.
Why do you think that is the case? Sorry, before you go on, why is that? And I noted it. This self-censorship, this self-deprecation. Is it poverty that you're an anthropologist? Is it poverty that has led them to this place of low self-worth? Or is it just systemic?
Yeah, I would say poverty is systemic as well. So it's a combination of both. I think it's the patriarchy too. That's and it's not seeing the worth of people because they are people. If you look at people with albinism, look at Tanzania, look at Malawi, they're being hunted for their organs or for who they are. Well, if you hear often enough, I'm not worth anything, or you're not worth anything, or you're not part of a community, that's when you start believing that. So, and again, it starts a lot with education and language. Yeah, the other element which I found very upbeat is the level of resilience, and related to that is the innovativeness that people show, the resourcefulness that people show, as part of that resilience. You talked about Vietnam. There's a small Vietnam is not one of our key countries, but we do some multi-country work as well. There's a small group of women with hearing impairments, and they were part of the Now Us Awards. And they brought those Now Us Awards back to Vietnam and set up an organization to promote more sign languages in school. It's called Hands Speak Vietnam. And they took that Now Us Awards, that concept of celebrating inclusion, to create the Now Deaf Awards in Vietnam, and entirely adapting it to their own context. And that was just a really nice example to see how people took matters into their own hands. Same with an organization in Mali. It's called AMPA. It's for the protection of people with albinism. It's a small association, and they organized a beauty pageant for initially only Miss Albinos. And we had a conversation and said, no, we can't just do women, because beauty pageants also have a very negative stereotype.
True.
I said, let's do Mr. and Mrs. Albinos. So it's also about gender parity there, and that's really shown that beauty is beyond the skin,
Right,
and you can see
right.
people's dignity and self-worth rising as that journey continues.
Yeah, you talk about resilience, and that's the one thing I think we talk about a lot in Africa and probably other emerging markets, because life hands you so many curveballs that the only thing people have is the spirit, and maybe even just this idea of joy in spite of the poverty, in spite of the situation. And that always surprises people as well. What are some of the hopes you have and things you hope to see?
I was always hoping that I don't know if you follow Humans of New York and I
Yes,
saw that. Yes, I was
yes.
always hoping that there would be an inclusion component in Humans of New York to
Right.
showcase a lot of the rights holders that have been served or that we have served as part of Voice. So that was one dream I tried to work on, but they've become so big that it's always quite hard once something becomes so popular and mainstream. But that was one dream I had. Um, the program initially would continue until 2024. So I'm also hoping that it would continue beyond 2024. And I'm really hoping that, like, a woman with disabilities or an LGBTI minority would take the lead and would just take it to the next level. That's my biggest hope.
Right. Oh, wow. I love that. I love the idea of seeing that. But even if you look at in Africa, we are still a long way. If you talk about LGBTQI, it's still, other than South Africa, where it's legal, the rest of Africa is still grappling with accepting LGBTQI as part of the community. Do you see that as, in your work as it's there's still some growth needed in that area with legislation, with people? What do you see at the grassroots?
In South Africa is one of the most progressive constitutions where the rights of people from various sexual minorities are being safeguarded and are being honored. Indeed, in quite a few of the countries in Africa, there is legislation around discrimination, allowed discrimination. But I see that the movement is growing. The grassroots, from the grassroots levels, the LGBTI movement is growing. And what is important there is that it's growing from within. It's not seen as something Western. And actually, I would say that the colonial powers brought a lot of the homophobia to Africa where it wasn't there before. If you look at, as an anthropologist, if you look at the history of Africa, there's a lot of beautiful stories about the third gender within the Hausa, or about same-sex consensual relationships being perfectly normal, coming before marriage or next to marriage. There are really matriarchal societies that have a lot more diversity embedded into it. And I would say that colonial powers didn't do us any favors no.
Yeah.
So you've shown that it can be changed already once to the negative. And I think now is the time to show that it can change to the positive.
Thank you. Well, I like that. I like the fact that it can be changed the positive, and what you have done by saying that you want to pass the baton because representation matters is such a great way. And I'll just say to others who are in the community, to give people a chance and see what they're going to do. And so what does the road look like for Marinke after this? What are some of your plans?
Well, Haraka, Haraka, Ina Baraka. I am
Kweli.
taking some time.
Kweli, haraka haraka haina baraka.
I want
Yes,
to take
indeed.
a moment to reflect on what I do next. I have some. Normally, they say, yeah, the older, the more mature, but I also like the older, the crazier. I don't know if I want to continue in the development field the way that it is now. So that is something that I'm reflecting upon. Maybe I should start trading rather than aiding.
Okay.
Maybe play a
Trading.
little bit with the textiles that I'm wearing. I love African designs. That,
Right.
yeah. So I'll see. I want to take a moment of reflection and see where life takes me next.
I love that. And what a wonderful way to end the podcast. See where life takes you next. May you be curious as you discover. May you be open as you let life lead you on that exciting journey. Thank you so much, Marinke. Thank
And
you.
thank you, Dorothy, for giving me this space.
Thank
And
you
I
so
hope I've
much.
spoken with no head and just heart.
Yes, you have. And really looking forward. Who knows? Maybe one day you'll see me in The Hague. If you're ever in Nairobi, please let's have coffee.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, I would love that. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. And that's all we have for you in today in No Head Podcast. Follow us on Instagram at No Head Podcast. And may you be curious and may you let life lead you on an interesting journey. May you have the dignity that is yours and may you feel empowered to do what you want to do in this life. That's all for now. Bye bye.